Are you familiar with the word neocolonialism? Neocolonialism is a system where empires pretend to let their colonies be free, but they are still continue to run them secretly. The Philippines, the continuing past Chapter 4 will tackle the neocolonial blueprint of Japan and the Philippines. Japan seek to establish the Philippines as a neocolonial country. Japan wants to impose what the United States successfully did after the occupation in the Philippines. In order to take the place as the principal beneficiary of archipelago's rich resources, they had to perform economic changes in adapting Philippine production to their own needs.
Japan's first priority was the increase in food production. It is a 5-year plan concerning to propagate the production of rice and corn. Yet, to achieve their plan, Japanese enabled Cajun from abandoned lands to plant additional rice and corn in order to increase the food production. The seeds were being distributed from provincial governors and city mayors to the farmers. These officials are responsible in reporting the results of activities to Department of Interior and Commerce in implementing the food production program. Over 1,000 hectares were planted by wheat, barley, and oats in Isabela, Cagayan, Mountain Province, Nueva Ecija, Cavite, and Batangas. Once the crops were harvested, the military will purchase it at a fixed price. If the farmers fail to produce the required crops, the army will repay for their losses. The food production program of Japan is the first step to assure the country's self-sufficiency, but this had nothing to do in Philippine interests. Since Japan will be using the Philippine supplies to feed the local employments, and to ship the food supplies to Japan. As the result, Filipinos suffer food shortage that time. The Japanese wants to change the Philippine economic from sugar to cotton industry since this shift was an important part of their plan. That's why the Japanese violently attacked the American to conquer and benefit to the economic dependence of the Sudland. After Japan had liberated the Philippines from American domination, they took their responsibility to aid the country and help to develop the neglected cotton industry for a vast and profitable market in the greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere. Japanese was trying to imitate the selfishness of American while dominating the land. They converted all sugar lands into cotton plantations, Japanese always saying that they were rehabilitating the Philippine economy after the devastation under Americans, but the truth is this will only benefit to Japanese firms. The Japanese believed that the Philippine climate was suitable for the raising of cotton, that's why they pushed the conversion of sugar lands into cotton plantations. The 5-year plan was projected the increase in production in a total of 1.5 million piculs of gind cotton from 1942 to 1946. Under this plan, the prices to be paid for cotton would be fixed by the military administration to ensure the Japanese control and its beneficiary in textile industry. Despite the dynamic campaign, the cotton project was a failure. It is because of the unwillingness cooperation of the farmers. They don't want to help the enemy. Instead, they planted food crops that are enough for themselves and to sell for the town and cities. The control of the industry was tightened with the organization of the Philippine Sugar Association dominated by Japanese members. These caused Filipino sugar growers to dissolve and join the new one and became a voiceless minority. The drastic reduction of sugar supply gave rise to hoarding, black marketing and profiteering. Some Filipinos are doing illegal trade of goods and services with the intention to evade the lawful requirements of such trade. Japan's overall economic plan also contained a blueprint for industry that aims to evaluate the economic potential of different sectors within the local economy and identify opportunities for new, community-based economic activity. Heavy materials will refine to Japan while the light materials like rami and cotton fibers will stay in the Philippines. Zaibatsu is a Japanese word that means wealthy clique. They are large capitalist enterprises of Japan. Japan implemented totalitarian, a product of alliance of the Zaibatsu and an aggressive military caste. Philippines become the neocolony of Japan instead of American. The Philippine was obligated to produce raw materials and the processing of certain products for the heavy industries of Japan. However, Filipinos recognized Japan's selfish motives and the republic's status as the puppet state. They are now convinced that their propaganda is inequitable. Because of that, they rejected Japanese exploitations and unequal treaties. Under the Japanese neocolony, only few opportunities left to the Filipinos. Buy and sell was the main Filipino activity during that time. The buy and sell market encouraged rampant thievery. It was listed as speculators, profiteers and black marketeers. Philippine faced scarcity, rationing, and because of that scenario, price control was imposed. After all, nothing worked and prices still continue to increase. The price control was turned over to the newly organized Economic Police Division of the Constabulary. The constabulary will confiscate goods from speculators and throw them into the profiteers' cage at the City Hall. Premier Hideki Tojo listed that in order to earn independence, Filipinos need to meet the following conditions. Firstly, Philippines need to dissolve all connections with the former colonial masters, like the Americans. Second, there must be economic rehabilitation, an integration of the economy into Japan's economic empire. And lastly, the spiritual and intellectual reorientation. The Filipino must adopt the Japanized or Nipponized culture. On June 16, 1943, the Prime Minister of Hideki Tojo announced that Japan will grant the Philippine independence before the year was over. And after knowing the announcement, the fascist Filipino political party, Kapisanan ng Paglilingkod sa Bagong Pilipinas, or Calabapi, organized a rally to show their thankfulness in granting the country's independence. By September 4, the Commission had drafted a new constitution, provided for a strong president with a single term of 6 years as followed in the structure of 1935 Constitution. Benigno Aquino was unanimously elected Speaker of the Assembly, and Jose P. Laurel, as the President of the new Republic. October 14, 1943, the Republic was inaugurated. Everyone is present from all of the officials. The crowd was cheering when General Emilio Aguinaldo and Artemio Ricart raised the Filipino flag while playing the Philippine national anthem. The grant of independence finally achieved by the Filipinos. And this put an end to the absolute rule of Japanese. Yet, there are 3 agreements imposed by Japan regarding the Philippine independence: the Pact of Alliance, and the 2 confidential agreements. First, the Memorandum on Questions between Japan and the Philippines arising from the Philippine independence, and second is the Basic Principles and Policies. In the memoranda, it was specified that Japanese nationals in the Philippines should be given the same rights as Filipino citizens. Thus, parity was imposed. The new government has been trying to do something to ease the sufferings of the people. Granting pardon was the Assembly's first act to those citizens that are convicted. By February 1944, the Tribune counted a total of 102,977 amnestied guerrillas. The Assembly also passed a relief bill that is 2 million for those war orphans and widows, and disabled soldiers. This move were taken for converting the government's new image. President Laurel pushed some policies for its national identity. It includes the emphasis in national language, to be taught in both public and private schools and universities. The teaching in Philippine history and Oriental culture is also emphasized. Laurel also ordered the Diwaing Bayan as the national anthem that rendered into Tagalog lyrics. The government concentrated on how to cope up with the food shortage, especially the rice, and some of its certain consequences like inflation, corruption, and crime. They've been making efforts but nothing worked and still the rice prices went high. Because of this, Laurel initiated a gardening movement under the slogan Magtanam Upang Mabuhay that became compulsory in May 1944. Magtanam Upang Mabuhay program is a nationwide campaign for self-sufficiency in food. The program, which is in line with the Green Revolution project, Specifically, this new project seeks to intensify the production of root crops as possible substitutes for rice and other cereals. Half of the produce crops go to the neighborhood and the other half would go to the government. This gardening movement became a labor conscription, a mandatory national service. The Calabapi had a labor recruitment agency. Because of the inflation, free accommodation of rice and other supplies are offered, instead of money wage. Inflation, unemployment, shortage of basic commodities, hunger, and disease developed corruption and crimes while under the Japanese occupation. Their life was not easy. That's why under the new constitution the purge for corruption was instituted.
Operations meet heavy flak, but no enemy plane interception. Nichols also south of Manila. Nielsen and Nichols fields are left bomb-pitted and burning.
The bombing worsened the status of the country, and on September 23, President Laurel proclaimed a state of war as the Japanese pressed him to do between the Philippine Republic and the United States and Great Britain. On October 1944, the Americans landed at Leyte and at Lingayen in January 1945 and entered Manila on February 3, 1945. 16,000 Japanese Marines and around 2,000 Army troops massacred thousands of Filipinos trapped in the southern sector of Manila. After the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan accepted their defeat on August 15. Laurel was arrested by the U.S. Army on September 12. Confined in Sugamo prison for almost a year. Returned to Manila in July 1946 and was taken to Muntinlupa prison to wait for his trial. In general, the living conditions in Philippines during the Japanese occupation was cruel due to the scarcity of many basic necessities and mistreatment of the natives, although, aside from these negative effects, they also brought some positive impact while dominating the land. Japan has helped construct and improve infrastructure in the Philippines. Also, while under the Japanese regime, the teaching of Tagalog and Philippine history was reserved for Filipinos.